Hello and welcome back to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here and welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to be showing you how I painted this simple beginner's landscape with a beautiful canola field. This is kept really simple because the focus is the middle ground tree line and the church spire, and of course that beautiful sky. But first, a quick peep at my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Tips and Techniques for the Complete Beginner, which is now available to order or pre-order depending on where in the world you are and which shop you choose. This is the reference photograph from Pixabay that I've used as inspiration. I'll leave a link to this in the description below. As always, I won't be trying to create an exact copy of this photograph, but using it as a starting point to create a beautiful but simple loose watercolour painting, something that's suitable for beginners and intermediates. The first thing I'm going to do is just draw out the tree line and the shape of the church really simply on my watercolour paper using a pencil. Today I'm going to be painting on hot press paper to keep it nice and simple and to keep the washes nice and smooth and clean. I don't need too much texture today, so I thought it'd be interesting to do a beginner's tutorial on hot press paper to make a change. I think hot press paper sometimes sort of gets a bit of a bad press, but it's actually just takes a bit of getting used to. The paint tends to sit on the surface a bit more, and you have to be a little bit more decisive and quick when you're painting so that things don't look overworked. I'm using Saunders Waterford hot press watercolour paper. It's taped to my board and my board's at an angle of about 20 to 30 degrees. I'm wetting the sky all over with a large wash brush, then using my 1.5-inch modeler brush and a mixture of cobalt blue with a little cerulean blue added to it. And I'm painting around some cloud shapes. Hope you can see that where I'm putting in the blue sky, I'm creating the negative shapes of the clouds. Because I'm painting wet in wet, the paint is diffusing beautifully where it meets the damp paper, where it meets some of the drier edges of the sky cloud areas. I get a slightly harder mark. Excuse me. Just bringing that sky down, a little bit paler down towards the horizon. Washed out my brush, squeezed all the water out of it so it's just damp, and then softening back a few areas, pulling a little bit of very pale paint into the base of the clouds here and there, so that's introducing the kind of suggestion of a little bit of shadow but still keeping it nice and fresh. Cerulean blue is a slightly staining colour, so you can't really lift back to the white of the paper when you're lifting clouds here, but I'm not looking to do that. I'm just looking to create a little bit of variety so that we create an illusion of the sky. Now this is a slightly richer, drier mix of sap green with some raw sienna and burnt sienna added to it. And I'm using the corner of my modeler brush to dab in some paint into the damp sky at the tree line. The slightly drier mix of paint, which I dabbed my brush onto a paper towel to remove any excess moisture, diffuses gently into the skyline but still stays where I put it. And I can add some slightly brighter green and then add a bit more of the burnt sienna and the cobalt blue to my mix to darken it, to add value and shadows close to the base of the trees. So I get a nice amount of variety of shades of green in my tree line. This is my clean damp 3/4-inch flat brush, which I'm using to sweep across the base of the tree line to get a nice clean edge, because I want my canola field to look as if it's growing up in front of that tree line. I'm taking my palette knife and I'm scraping it through the rich paint of the tree line, just in a few places around the church in particular. This will give me some paler trunks that just seem to be catching the light, or the suggestions of that. If you don't like to use this technique, you can wait till your tree line is fully dry and then paint on a few tree trunks and branches if you prefer to do it that way. And then again, running that clean damp flat brush across the base just to make sure it's a nice clean edge there. Now it's time to leave this to dry completely. Now that it's dry, I'll show you a way to create the canola field and get a bit of depth and distance into it, but keeping it really simple. This is lemon yellow, and I'm dragging a mid-value of lemon yellow using the tips of my Watercolor brush, or use any flat brush, a thin strip of lemon yellow. And then I'm going to add a bit of cad yellow into the lemon yellow to warm it up, and then run another strip along, joining it to that one. As I come forward with my field, I'll continue to warm it up with more cad yellow so it gets a little bit brighter towards the foreground. The idea here is that cooler colours like the lemon yellow recede and warmer colours like cad yellow come forward. So by changing the temperature of our yellow, we can create a kind of illusion or suggestion of depth and distance in the field without really doing much more to it. And then finally, I'm finishing off the very foreground by adding a little bit of raw sienna into my lemon yellow and cad yellow, and this is warming it up even more. And I'm dabbing with my brush to get a little bit of texture into the foreground, just to give the illusion of a few more slightly visible canola flowers just across the foreground. At this point, I'm now going to lay my board flat on the desk, and this will stop any paint from moving around. And what I'm going to do is then take a lightly crumpled paper towel or tissue and very gently dab into the foreground, and that gives me a little bit more texture. And once I've done this, then I'm going to use a little tiny sprinkle of salt in the foreground, and that will give me even more texture and just the hint of a few flowers in the foreground. I don't want to put too much detail or value in the field. I want the eye to sort of skim across the field to the tree line and the church. So this is just a sprinkle of a very fine table salt, not much, just a few grains just in the foreground, and each grain of salt will just push the damp paint away and create a tiny little bloom, which should give me the impression of the canola flowers. I now need to leave this to dry completely, then I can come back and finish the painting. Now that it's completely dry, I'm going to add a few details, not much, using the wet on dry technique, which is using wet paint onto the dry painting. This time the paint won't soften and diffuse, it'll stay where I put it. I'm using a small calligraphy brush, but any small round brush with a point or a detail brush will do. I'm carefully going to paint over my penciled in outline of my church. I can use a flat brush, or otherwise known as a one-stroke brush, just to put in some of the geometric shapes, making sure that I keep the church darker on the left side where it's in shadow. I need to be careful to make sure I get my spire right, so I paint that in really carefully with a detail brush, and then I can paint in the roof, and then I can put in a few little darks and details just to draw attention to the church. The reddish brown that I'm using with this burnt sienna and a little bit of cobalt blue added for the darker areas will really stand out, as it's complemented by the green of the trees and should make for a really attractive focal point. Notice how I'm bringing some of the church down into the trees, keeping the edge quite ragged, so that I'm sort of negatively painting the top of the trees with the wall of the church, if you see what I mean. And now I'm going to add a few burnt sienna trunks and branches just to the trees that are closest to the church. Maybe a few others here and there, but not too much. Just enough to add a bit more definition to the tree line. This also helps to draw attention to our point of interest. And now the burnt sienna and cobalt blue mix, slightly darker, but not too dark, but just enough to get in the shadows here and there, and just a few little darker marks for windows, etc. Keeping it nice and simple. You can sort of rub anything off if it looks a little bit too harsh. But I think I'm just about happy with that. This is such a simple painting. You could add more value to the tree line. You could add a bit more detail to the flowers at the front. But I like the looseness of this. I like how colour really carries this painting. And I hope you can see that by keeping the washes nice and simple on this hot press paper, it's really effective at giving us this lovely evocative late spring, early summer scene. And of course, if you want to use cold press, or if it's all that you've got, then please feel free to do that. The method here will work equally as well for cold press as it does for hot press. Even if you're an absolute beginner, I really think that you could have a go at a scene like this. And don't worry if it doesn't work out first time. When we're learning, things rarely do. But it's certainly worth sort of persisting with. And I'm hoping that this method here should give you a really useful and fairly simplistic roadmap to follow to create a very effective painting once you get used to handling your washes and things like the drying time of your paper and all that sort of thing. Well, many thanks for watching. Please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It's free to do, and it lets the YouTube algorithm know that people are interested in seeing our paintings. And thank you so much to everybody that supports us and our channel on Patreon. We really do appreciate you. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.